Hello, dear friends. Thank you for joining me today. I'm speaking to you from a quiet place in my heart, hoping that these words might bring some comfort and hope to yours. Many of us are walking through valleys right now. Perhaps you're facing illness, loss, loneliness, or uncertainty about the future. The weight of these burdens can feel overwhelming. And in these moments, joy might seem distant or even impossible. Today, I want to talk with you about something that has sustained countless believers through their darkest hours: joy in God. Not a superficial happiness that depends on circumstances, but a deeper wellspring that can nourish us even in life's desert places. Joy in God is different from what the world calls happiness. Happiness often depends on what happens to us, our circumstances, our comfort, our success. But joy in God runs deeper. It's a quiet confidence that God is present with us and working for our good, even when we cannot see or feel it. In the book of Nehemiah, there's a beautiful verse that tells us, "The joy of the Lord is your strength." Nehemiah 8, verse 10. Notice that it's not our joy, but the Lord's joy that becomes our strength. There's something profoundly comforting about that. When we're too weary to generate joy ourselves, we can draw from His inexhaustible supply. This joy isn't about denying our pain or pretending everything is fine when it isn't. The same Bible that speaks of joy also contains laments, tears, and honest expressions of suffering. Joy in God can coexist with sorrow. The Apostle Paul described himself as sorrowful, yet always in 6:10. This paradox is at the heart of the Christian experience. When I speak of joy in God, I'm talking about a quiet assurance that anchors the soul even when emotions are turbulent. It's finding a reason to continue when everything within you wants to give up. It's discovering that God's presence is enough, even when His answers aren't what we expected or hoped for. There are days when just getting out of bed requires more strength than we possess. The journey ahead seems too long, the burden too heavy. It's in these moments that joy in God becomes not just a pleasant emotion, but a vital source of strength. Richard Baxter, a pastor who lived in the 17th century and knew much about suffering, wrote about finding strength from spiritual joy rather than natural supplies. As our bodies weaken, as our circumstances deteriorate, we can learn to draw from a different well, the deep joy of knowing and being known by God. This joy gives us strength in several ways. First, it reminds us that our current suffering is not the end of the story. There is a larger narrative unfolding, one in which God is working all things together for good, even when we cannot see how. Second, joy in God helps us resist the temptation to find relief in harmful ways. As Matthew Henry wisely observed, "The joy of the Lord will arm us against the assaults of our spiritual enemies and put our mouths out of taste for those pleasures with which the tempter baits his hooks." When we find our deepest satisfaction in God, other temptations lose their power over us. Third, joy in God connects us to a power beyond ourselves. We were never meant to face life's challenges alone or in our own strength. Joy opens our hearts to receive God's strength, which is made perfect in our weakness. I've sat with many people in hospital rooms, in grief counseling sessions, and in moments of crisis. Those who find a way to maintain joy in God, not a forced smile, but a genuine trust in his goodness, seem to possess a resilience that defies explanation. They still weep, they still struggle, but they are not crushed. There is a strength that sustains them. Perhaps you're thinking, this sounds nice, but you don't understand my situation. How can I possibly find joy when I'm in so much pain? I want to acknowledge that suffering is real and it's heavy. The Bible doesn't trivialize suffering or suggest that we should simply cheer up. Jesus himself was described as a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, Isaiah 53:3. Yet the same Jesus, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, Hebrews 12:2, shows us that joy and suffering can coexist. His example teaches us that joy isn't the absence of suffering, but the presence of a hope that transcends it. When we look at Scripture, we see this pattern repeatedly. The early Christians were filled with joy, even as they faced persecution. Acts 13:52. Paul and Silas sang hymns of praise at midnight in a prison cell, their backs still bleeding from being beaten, Acts 16:25. This doesn't mean they didn't feel pain. It means they had discovered a joy that pain couldn't extinguish. Their circumstances didn't determine their joy. Their relationship with God did. If you're in a season of suffering right now, I want you to know that it's okay to lament. It's okay to cry out to God with your questions and your pain. The Psalms give us permission and language for this. But even in lament, we can hold on to the thread of joy that comes from knowing we are not alone, that we are loved, and that this suffering is not the final word. Joy in God doesn't remove our suffering, but it gives us a different perspective on it. It helps us see that our pain is not purposeless, that God is with us in it, and that it will not last forever. How do we cultivate this joy, especially when we don't feel it naturally? Let me suggest a few gentle practices. First, remember that joy in God is not just a feeling we generate, but a reality we receive. The psalmist doesn't say, generate joy in the Lord, but delight yourself in the Lord. Psalm 37:4. Turn your attention to who God is, His faithfulness, His love, His presence with you. Joy often follows awareness. Second, immerse yourself in Scripture, particularly passages that remind you of God's character and promises. The Psalms are especially helpful here, as they express the full range of human emotion while continually returning to trust in God. Third, practice gratitude, even for small mercies. In dark times, it can be difficult to see anything good, but intentionally noticing and thanking God for small gifts, a moment of peace, the kindness of a friend, a beautiful sunset, can gradually reorient our hearts toward joy. Fourth, connect with other believers who can hold hope for you when you cannot hold it for yourself. Sometimes we need to borrow joy from the community of faith until our own joy returns. Finally, be patient with yourself. Joy may come as a sudden flood, or it may return gradually, like the slow melting of winter into spring. Either way, it is God's gift to you, and He is faithful to provide what you need. Dear friends, whatever valley you're walking through today, know that you are not alone. The God who commands us to rejoice in Him also enables us to do so, even in our darkest hours. May you discover, perhaps to your surprise, that the joy of the Lord is your strength. Not a strength that shields you from all suffering, but a strength that sustains you through it, a strength that helps you take the next step when you thought you couldn't go on. And may you find, as countless believers before you have found, that this joy becomes an anchor for your soul, holding you steady when the storms of life rage around you. Until next time, may you be held in God's loving embrace, and may His joy be your strength.